So again, thank you everybody for joining us on this Wednesday. We are really thrilled to have Brittany and her expertise here to talk about the 2025 Maryland legislative session. She's going to be breaking down the current environmental and climate legislative landscape. We're so grateful for her doing that for us this June. What we have on the agenda for today is just to talk a little bit about GBCS, give you an overview of everything that we're all about. Brittany will go into her presentation. And we do have a slide for the agenda, if we could go there. Brittany will talk about her presentation. We'll leave lots of time for you all to ask questions and get answers from her. We'll go into some breakout sessions if we have time, and then come back to the large group so that we could recap and talk about some highlights that you all discussed in the breakouts. And then we'll leave some time for closing, and we might be able to give you guys a little bit more information on our plenary speakers for this year's summit. Next slide. A little about the Greater Baltimore Climate Summit. It is a summit organized by a committee of professionals independent of their institutions. Some of the professionals are at Morgan State University, Baltimore Green Space, the HBCU Environmental Justice Technical Collaborative, and it's an innovative gathering inspired by California Strategic Growth Council, tailored to the unique needs here in Baltimore and the surrounding counties. And our four main objectives are to bring awareness to the most pressing issues, increase organizational capacity to capture funding, initiate the development of a synchronized agenda across organizations and institutions. And then we also want to create a safe space to discuss challenges that we are facing in our sector, including challenges relating to public policy, hence the webinar that we are all sitting on right now. Next slide. Just wanted to show you all our host committee for this year and give a shout out to every single person on the host committee. The summit last year would not have been possible without our 2024 host committee, and what we have in store for you all this year will not be possible without every single person on this slide. Cindy is also a host committee member. We just need to get her information up, and we will do that soon. So thank you so much to everybody who is supporting the implementation of the summit this year. Next slide. Some impact that we've had over the last 12 months. One, we were able to execute last year's summit in 90 days, which, based on some feedback that we got from you all, was, it was a large task, but we were able to get it done and have the inaugural summit and have it be, as impactful as it was. Thank you to all 312 people who were in attendance. Super grateful for you all, and we're really excited for this upcoming year. We definitely want to honor and promote the speakers that we had last year, including Dr. Scobie Wilson and Ruth Ann Norton, Senator Ben Brooks, and Leslie from EPA Region 3. And so far, we just want to give you guys a little bit of insight on the fact that we have been surveying you all on what priority climate issues are, and we are in the analysis phase, and we will be, kind of compiling all those details to report on what you all think should be prioritized in terms of climate action, environmental justice, sustainability, and clean action. So thank you for always completing the surveys relating to our events, and thank you to everybody who has attended our events in the past, and thank you for continuously showing up and making your voice be heard. I believe the next slide will be me handing it over to Brittany. So if we could give a virtual round of applause. I know we can't hear you guys, but we are so appreciative of Brittany for sharing her expertise, and she is an expert, and she's always in these rooms. I've seen her in Annapolis. And so she is a really good individual and subject matter expert to be letting you guys know what happened this legislative session.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. I'm going to put my email in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to connect or to work together. Many people I've looked through the attendance list are familiar names and familiar faces. I appreciate seeing you, and hello to all of you who I haven't met before. So to tell you a little bit about Chesapeake Climate Action Network, we are an organization that believes that you have to do really good policy work, but also really good grassroots work to get important environmental legislation over the finish line. We are a little bit different than some of the other environmental groups in Annapolis because we focus on climate action. So during the legislative session, we are digging deeply into the energy conversation, building decarbonization conversation, clean energy build out. Those are some of the topics that we focused on. And so we went into the legislative session with three primary priorities. One, the Abundant, Affordable Clean Energy Act, which was led by Delegate Charkoudian and Senator Brooks. That legislation focused on some tweaks to the solar renewable energy credit system to ensure that each type of solar energy is getting its appropriate allocation and not getting more than it needs. It also focused on battery storage build out in the state. Another priority we had was the Renew Act, which is Maryland's version of the Climate Superfund bills. Make Polluters Pay is the national brand. And so the idea with that bill is that we would do a cost calculation in the state to determine how much climate change is costing Marylanders. And then with that cost calculation, we would assess that fee, assessed a one-time fee onto the largest, most polluting fossil fuel companies. That bill was sponsored by Delegate Fraser Hidalgo and Senator Hester. And the picture you see on the screen was the rally we had for the bill early in session. And then the last bill we were focused on as we went into the legislative session was the Better Buildings Act, sponsored by Delegate Boafo and Senator Brooks. And that bill was going to require all new construction in Maryland to be fully electric, and also had some provisions around fuel debiasing and solar readiness for buildings. Next slide. So I know that you all had a conversation with some of the Maryland LCV team earlier in the year about legislative session. And so I won't spend too much time on this slide, but it is always important to remember what challenges we were facing as we were entering into legislative session, and challenges that really emerged as we were, headed towards April, headed towards sine die. So at the beginning of session, there was a lot of discussion around energy bills, because we know that in the winter of 2024, utility bills were extremely high, especially in the Baltimore City region. And the reason that they were so high was, one, gas distribution rates have been going up over time. And gas distribution rates are actually very, very high right now. And because the supply charges have been going down, people didn't realize how much the distribution charges were going up. But last winter, when it was also exceptionally cold due to, symptoms that we're having from climate change, those two factors made utility bills extremely high, to the effect that
Amen to that, brother.
everybody's minds at the beginning of session. Then the other issue that we were facing at the beginning of session was the $3 billion budget deficit that we knew the governor and the MGA would need to deal with by making cuts in various areas. And so that the push and pull of deciding where can we make cuts was very difficult this session. And then also, as we all are experiencing the chaos and challenges that are constantly raining down from the new federal administration, And last but not least, this actually was my first legislative session as an advocate with Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Before this, I was working in the office of Delegate Lorik Charkoudian. Next slide. And so within the first month of session, what we saw is leadership really coalesced and became a cross bicameral team to say, okay, how can we address these rising energy bills? What can we do to ensure that we help Marylanders make their lives more affordable by addressing the utility situation? And so in that first month, leadership had a press conference. You see the Maryland Matters coverage right here. And they presented a suite of bills that were aimed to solve the energy situation. One was the Next Generation Energy Act, which focused on, at the time when it first came out, it was focused on gas deployment and nuclear energy. They also unveiled the Renewable Energy Certainty Act, which would require that all counties would make room for clean energy, specifically battery storage projects and community scale size solar projects. And then last but not least, the Strategic Energy Planning Office legislation, which was going to create a state-led planning office so that as we continue to evolve in terms of clean energy and data center build out and transmission build out, we will have a state-led objective source to get energy information, and we wouldn't be so reliant on utility companies and also PJM, which is our electric grid operator, and it spans 13 states in the District of Columbia. Next slide. So to skip all the way from the beginning of session to the end of session, a lot of work was required during session, a lot of advocacy. We did a lot of protesting. This session was really tough, but by the end of session, because of our advocacy and the shared advocacy of some of you on the call, we were really able to turn the Next Generation Energy Act into a win for the climate and for the environmental movement. And so some features of the finalized legislation include that it removed trash incineration from the renewable portfolio standard. And that's something that a lot of environmental justice groups have been advocating for years, almost a decade. And so finally, that language landed in the Next Generation Energy Act and made it over the finish line. Another thing that the Next Generation Energy Act, another thing that was absorbed into the bill were a lot of utility accountability measures. And so the way throughout the process, Next Generation Energy Act ended up being kind of an omnibus bill. And so the STRIDE reform legislation sponsored by Delegate Embry, that instead of giving a green light for rapid rate of return, new gas distribution build out, we put some boundaries on it. So especially with those Exelon utilities, they've been using the STRIDE program to increase those gas distribution rates, like I discussed at the beginning of this presentation. And so the language that landed in the bill created the environment where they won't be getting the green light from the PSC to just build out the gas distribution infrastructure as they please and to take that money from ratepayers in order to pay for it. There's also multi-year rate plan reform, which is another way that they do additional gas distribution build out, but also make a lot of money off of Marylanders. They have to do a better job explaining when they use contractual labor. And this is particularly relevant to Maryland in a moment like this with the Piedmont transmission line. So the utilities, especially Exelon utilities, have gotten in the habit of contracting out with third parties, the work that needs to be done to build out our energy system. But when they contract out, they actually charge ratepayers more. And so there's language in the bill to say that you need to use in-house labor usually. And when you're not using in-house labor, you need to have a very good reason why you are choosing to contract out labor. Also, it was quite a funny conversation for one of the bills called the Ratepayer Freedom Act, which was a close analysis of some of the extra fees that they've been putting on ratepayers. And what was revealed is one of those fees is private plane usage. And so in the Next Generation Energy Act, you see a line that says utilities cannot rate base the use of private planes. So a lot of utility accountability that was from various bills that were presented during session, but the vehicle where they got over the finish line was the Next Generation Energy Act. The bill also includes the procurement of 1,750 megawatts of battery storage, which was originally proposed in the Abundant Affordable Clean Energy Act. That includes both transmission connected storage, so the big battery projects that support power plants, but also requires the utilities to make a plan for distribution connected battery storage, which is really interesting and will really help us to shave peak load. It does require the PSC, I believe it's the PSC that's leading, but it might be the Maryland Energy Administration, to determine some opportunities for cost sharing around new nuclear. It also includes some language about dispatchable energy, and the dispatchable energy section is the reason that we are fighting the bill at the beginning of session, because really the language there alludes to this idea that we might need new gas generation in state. We do not believe that we need new gas generation in state. We actually think that a lot of the modeling around what our load growth looks like is a little bit of an overestimate. And we think that especially with energy efficiency measures, with building out clean energy in a reasonable rate, and with measures to shave peak loads, such as bringing on battery projects, that we won't need new gas plants. So that's what we really fought. In the finalized legislation, all of the site presumption and fast tracking language on the dispatchable energy was removed. And so even though we're still closely watching to see if any private companies try to build new gas plants in the state because of the language that still did get over the finish line in the Next Generation Energy Act, there's a lot of opportunity for us to fight gas plants that originally in the language was taken from us. And last but not least, the finalized legislation has some nation-leading data center requirements, such as load ramp-up periods, a special rate for large load customers, but that's primarily alluding to data centers, and some other provisions that really are the lessons learned from Virginia to ensure that we don't end up in the same situation in 10 years from now. Next slide. So challenges that remain. I mean, although we were able to fix the Next Generation Energy Act, we call it the bill that is most improved from session, still, there were not a lot of wins this year. This was a very tough year for climate and environment. And so the Better Buildings Act did not move at all. And we're still in need in our state for legislation that will cover the decarbonization of new buildings, both from the point of view of new construction, because we do have some codified language like the Building Energy Performance Standards that aims to decarbonize new buildings. But I discuss this fact all the time. The building that was recently renovated on the Annapolis campus, it doesn't even meet BEP standards. And so you really see that there's a need to create language that covers new construction. Also, the transportation decarbonization was not an easy conversation this year. There were not a lot of wins. The Transportation and Climate Alignment Act did not get over the finish line. There was a bill that advocated for the rollback of our Advanced Clean Cars 2 program and Advanced Clean Trucks program. And now we've seen that the federal administration is really attacking those programs as well. They've recalled the waiver that California had, which is the document that undergirded all of our abilities to implement programs like this. And so both at the state and federal level, these programs are in jeopardy. And then last but not least, we were able to get our Renew Act study bill, which was the cost calculation portion of the Renew Act, over the finish line. And also there was another advocacy group that was able to pass a data center impact study, but Governor Moore vetoed both of those pieces of legislation. And so that is in jeopardy right now as well. So a lot of challenges still remain since the legislative session has wrapped up. And happy to take questions, but first I'll pass it back to Kari.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I learned a lot. So you are literally an expert. We will open it up for questions. I see we've already got a hand from Jennifer. For the questions portion, you all can feel free to raise your hand. Once you're called upon, you can come off mute, ask your question. If you want to be camera on, that's fine. If not, that's fine either way. And then if you have questions that you want to place in the chat, we will read those off throughout the Q&A as well. Jennifer, feel free to ask.
So I just love the fact that you're doing this, and so I'm so grateful. I wonder, Brittany, if you can update us on this core priority of getting funding for climate work, because you did, as did others, extraordinary work to get the Renew Act passed, and it was vetoed by the governor, and Delegate Root's bill, which would have helped the AG sue the fossil fuel companies, also didn't make it even to pass this session. I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of overcoming the veto and doing a veto override compared to other options. I understand that there's some private funding things that people are looking at, but getting the money from the government would be quite helpful, and where we are in terms of Delegate Root's bill to hold folks accountable through lawsuits. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a great question. And yeah, I'm happy to bring that up in this conversation. It is key. So Maryland has always been a leader in terms of climate action, but a lot of that leadership was because we were undergirded by the federal government and promised a lot of federal dollars to get our climate action projects done. And, you know, we have our climate pollution reduction plan, which states that we need about $1 billion per year in order to achieve our climate goals. And so now more than ever, funding all of the work in building decarbonization, in EV charging build out, and clean energy is the most important piece. Funding all of these things is the most important piece in getting them done. And so I do lead the Climate Investments Coalition. And just like Jennifer was saying, there were quite a few things that we were hoping we would make some progress on. One of them is the Renew Act. So that is a way to bring in resilience funding into the state. The primary purpose isn't getting the money. It's primarily Superfund is the idea that undergirds the bill, which is to say you made a mess, you need to clean it up. But because of that principle, and because we're considering the global climate as the Superfund site, what it would do is bring in resilience dollars. We were also looking at MDE is supposed to be moving forward on a cap and invest study to see how that could be a source of funding for the state. But as of right now, they don't seem to be moving forward. There was also a bill sponsored by Delegate Dana Stein the coal transport fee bill that was supposed to bring in money into the state, but that didn't make it over the finish line. And then last but not least, as you mentioned, Jennifer, the Climate Restitution Fund was a bill sponsored by Delegate Ruth and Delegate Terasa. But that one is a little bit different than the other Climate Investment Coalition bills that we were monitoring, because that one made some changes, like you were saying, for the AG's office to be able to sue fossil fuel companies. And whenever you're the plaintiff in the climate cases, what you're suing about is deception. So you deceived us, you knew that this was going to cause problems, and now we're experiencing those impacts. In the bill, I believe it does create a place to hold those funds and distribute those funds. But you know, that's not as clean or as streamlined as when you do these, like the Renew Act, where everything is just based on the legislation and not as based on the courts. So yes, all challenges. We did not pass any revenue raising legislation, and that is a key piece of moving forward in terms of climate action.
We do have a question from Laurie Rollins Anderson in the chat. Her question is, what was Governor Moore's rationalization for vetoing those two bills? Is the administration no longer a climate ally?
That's a great question, Lori. And I do encourage everyone to express their disappointment with the veto. And if you need help with that, feel free to reach out. Again, my email is in the chat. We are working to resolve that problem because we do think that the Renew Act study is important, both for a potential future enforcement bill around the new Renew Act, but also in general. It's an important thing to know how much the climate change is costing the state. I would say, I put in the chat Governor Moore's statement that he wrote about why he vetoed the bills. Essentially, he's saying that he thinks we need to back away from studies and that now is the time for action, and that he doesn't want to distract agencies in a difficult federal context from being able to be nimble and flexible about what work they might need to do. And then also he spoke to the fiscal note. The bill costs the state about $500,000, but in relation to that, the funding was coming from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, and that special fund is exactly designed for projects like this. And vetoing this bill did not add more money to the general fund. So it's a little bit tough to understand the exact reasons that he vetoed the Renew Act study. And, you know, I'm just continuing to advocate for the fact that the state needs to complete the work regardless.
Good question. I see we have a hand in the chat, John. Did you want to just come off mute and ask your question, or did you want to type it into the chat?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I don't mind talking. It's easier than typing. Hi, everyone. It seems just from listening just now that we don't have a concrete understanding of the administration's positions going forward on climate action. The studies were $1.28, I think, million in a $67 billion state budget. These were not expensive studies that he vetoed in the grand scheme of things, and we don't really have a full understanding of the administration's position. How do you plan and how do you recommend for activists to engage the administration better? Like, I sit on the AG's Environmental Advisory Council, and we have trouble engaging with the AG on some of these issues, except at the meetings, which are every maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Um, um, we're not sure how to be engaging with MDE. We're really looking for advice on how to engage them because we need to understand if you guys are not going to be participants in these projects and you have a Maryland climate pathway for the future for carbon reductions that we're not getting close to, we really need a reckoning. And I'd love to get a better understanding on how we reach that reckoning with the administration so we can understand whether they're really aboard or they're not. Because all this wiggling around and not having direct conversations is not productive.
Yeah, that's
Does that
helpful,
make sense?
John. And I agree with you. I also feel frustrated. And the way I'm looking at things right now is kind of two-sided. On one side, just demonstrating that climate is a winning issue, especially in Maryland. In a Maryland context, we want to move forward. I think that's the messaging that we have to continue to use, continue to show the second floor and the MGA that Marylanders want climate action. And no matter what's going on at the federal level, it doesn't slow down what's happening in the climate, because that's just based on basic science, basic natural principles. And so the only way to slow down climate change is by taking action. But the other piece is, just like you're saying, accountability. We have to be sure that when things happen, such as a veto for the Renew Act, or you spoke about the AG, just recently, all of the clean car states filed a lawsuit together to sue the Trump administration and the EPA for removing the California waiver for tailpipe standards. Maryland was the only state that didn't join the lawsuit. And so speaking up and saying, hey, you need to be held accountable for that decision making. That decision is not in line with Maryland values, is what we have to do.
So is it pressure from the outside or engagement from the inside?
I think a little bit of both. Yeah.
Well, we're my team and partners that I'm working with, like Act Now Baltimore, we're very excited about stepping up, because this is a time to step up, not step back, like the administration seems to be doing. So we're interested in developing greater coalitions to apply greater pressure. If you want to talk to me, I'd gladly put my information in the chat, because we have a testing project in South Baltimore that we're working on right now, and we're going to use it as a platform as a kind of a systemic critique of issues surrounding climate and environmental justice. It's no time to back down, to be backing up just because of the federal administration. So we're happy to have greater conversations, because we're looking for a pathway forward to engage better, because we're not seeing it. We're seeing this administration withdraw. But thank you for the time and for this call.
Yes, please reach out, John. I put my email in the chat again, and I also shared a Maryland Matters article about Maryland not joining in the lawsuit.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Cindy, did you get your question answered, Cindy, about the lawsuit?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much, Brittany. I don't know too much about that issue, but I appreciate the resource share so that I can learn more. I guess I do have one question. So we just heard some legislative wins, and the Next Energy Generation Act is a huge, huge, huge win, and I'm wondering, what happens next? So there's the potential of new clean and renewable energy build out. There's all these new processes that uphold transparency and other measures that are within the bill. And Brittany, if you could maybe help me understand a little bit better, if there's anything short, medium, long term that you're particularly excited about as we consider ways to, um, you know, make Maryland secure and clean when it comes to energy.
Sure, thank you for the question. So I would say in terms of timelines and what to look out for, what I'm most excited about is the battery storage procurement, because that will be bringing on those battery storage projects within the next 2 years. The transmission connected projects are practically guaranteed to come online within the next 2 years, because not only is it a procurement, but it's a time-bound procurement for those battery storage projects, which is what was exactly needed for those projects, because they were already in the PJM, that's our electric grid operator. They were in their queue. And so the reality is the PJM queue, the line that exists to connect to the PJM grid, is one of the longest lines in the nation. And so a lot of the projects entered years ago, and now what we needed was specific procurement for those projects, so that as they're emerging from the queue, that the projects will still pencil. But the Public Service Commission is doing some rulemaking for longer term battery storage projects. This is just a one-time procurement, but those projects will be adding capacity to our grid within the next 2 years. The other thing to watch out for, though, and this is something that I'm not excited about, is that dispatchable energy request for proposals that will be on October 1st. That we need to watch, and we need to be sure that companies don't just offer gas to us when we don't need it, and that if gas projects participate in that, which is not a procurement, there's no money that will be offered in the October 1st request. All that's offered is a slightly shorter CPCN process, which is Certificate of Public Necessity and Convenience. And so we'll see if that small cookie is enough to attract new gas. And if so, then we'll have to fight it at every turn.
Thank
Thank you.
Brittany. Sean has a question in the chat. Could these studies be privately funded or completed by a coalition of universities?
That's a great question, Shan. And the reality is yes and no. So on one hand, of course, we can, as advocates, as individuals who are connected to funding, connected to universities who do great work, we could have the study done. But the reality is, if we want this study to undergird enforcement of a climate superfund future bill, then we wouldn't want these items to be privately funded, because then, we do expect that when we pass the Enforcement Renew Act legislation, the largest, most polluting fossil fuel companies aren't going to want to be held liable. And so because they won't want to be held liable, they will probably try to wiggle their way out of that legislative bind by suing the state. And so we have to do everything with the idea that we'll have to defend our process in court. And so in court, we wouldn't want there to be any assumption of bias because of who the funders are, or assumption of bias because of who participated in the study. And so for the study to be as objective and neutral as possible, we want it to be done by the state. You're on mute, Kari.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for that. We're gonna kick it to Kimberly and then we'll wrap up questions with Jennifer and then go into breakouts.
Yeah, so my question is, Brittany and Kari. So what do we need to be doing now proactively for next year? So I'm a real big advocate on strategizing and how is it that we go into next session, because I think there's a real disappointment with the Renew Act, because a lot of people did a lot of work on that bill, and for him to, you know, for it to pass and then renew it, and then veto it, that's very disappointing. So what do we do and how do we do what we need to be doing in the midst of before next session?
Great question. I appreciate it, Kimberly, and special hello to you as well. So I would say that a couple things need to happen between here and legislative session. One, we do need to, all of you, I encourage everyone on this call to reach out to the governor's office, reach out to anyone you know on his team, and express your disappointment with the veto. You know, let him know that this study matters to us and this campaign matters to us. But second, do whatever all of us have our own lanes, and whatever you have to do as far as building grassroots power. We want to make sure that we're going into the next legislative session with as big of coalitions as possible and as much grassroots power for climate action as possible. And then last but not least, and specific, this is the really specific thing that we need to do between now and next legislative session on the Renew Act. The next decision makers on Renew will be the MGA again. So the way that you overturn a veto is right as soon as they get back to session, the first thing they have to do, the first opportunity, is overturn relevant vetoes. Overturn vetoes that they think matter. And they literally cannot start regular legislative session work until they address the vetoes. And if they decide not to bring the veto override of Renew up for a vote before they get started on normal matters of business, then we lose the opportunity. So soon we'll be coordinating advocates, stakeholders, and organizations to do a whip count. So we're going to email and contact every single Democratic member of the legislature and ensure that when the Renew Act study veto override comes to a vote, that they will vote for it. Because we know that usually when things get to the floor, you know, it's pretty much a party line vote, but things can be a little bit more sensitive when it's a veto override. So we do need to contact all of our legislators to ask them, do you want to, can we count on you to vote for the veto override? And, you know, if they express hesitation, connect them with me so I can get them better informed on the bill and why it's an important step forward for Maryland.
Thank you.
All righty, Jennifer, it's your turn.
I just put some emails in the chat for some people in the governor's office that people could shoot emails for. And I'm sure Brittany has other ideas that are even better. But Brittany, we all know that the governor has sort of a sub-cabinet type working group on climate issues, and that every state agency was asked to create a climate plan. However, those plans were created before Trump gutted the funding and took away many of the regulations. So in theory, supposedly the governor's team with Megan Conklin is working on a new set of plans. So I wondered if there's any intel on how those agency plans are going, number one. And number two, we need to deploy you know, some of these clean energy things. So I wondered how the wind, to the extent that we can do wind, is that moving? I saw that Ben Carson, interestingly, a former Bush cabinet appointee, is pushing for solar. Not often you see a Republican cabinet member pushing for solar. I'm wondering how the solar's going. And I know that Constellation is going to be pushing very hard for additional nuclear capacity. So I just wondered those two issues. One is how is the state doing on updating their plans, and can we and should we be involved in that, number one? And number two, what's the status of deploying more clean energy?
Thank you for the question, Jennifer. A special hello to you too. Great question. So as far as the climate plans that were produced by the agencies, some of them are plans, robust plans with goals and timelines, but others of them, you know, who you would expect, who's less familiar with the topic, is more like a climate analysis. How could we consider climate? What are the opportunities to integrate climate action and environmental justice into our work? It's not so much as a time-bound plan. This is what we're going to do this year and at this time. And so I haven't heard about the plans being updated. That's news to me. And I don't know the status. But as far as our clean energy work, the Renewable Energy Certainty Act is a really, really important piece of legislation to ensure that community solar projects are going to be built in the near term around the state. And we know that solar energy is the cheapest electrons and also the quickest to deploy. And so hopefully within the next year, we'll see a lot of new community solar projects coming online because of the streamlining of requirements through that bill. And also, like we said, like I keep reiterating, the battery storage projects are going to make a big difference for our state. As far as our US wind project, it is so close to being ready to build. Right now, the last thing that we're waiting on is a legislative fix in Delaware related to an accessory facility. It's not their operations and maintenance facility. They received the local permit that's needed for that, but it's some other like maintenance related facility that they need one last legislative fix in Delaware, and then they can start construction. And then the last thing I'll say related to clean energy build out in the state, the Renewable Energy Certainty Act actually didn't do anything important or positive for utility scale solar. And so I do expect that next legislative session, there will be a bill to do the fixes that are needed to accelerate utility scale solar, because they do need an update of the SREC program and some other little changes around siting requirements for them to be able to really thrive in our state.
Thank you, Brittany, so much. We're gonna jump into breakout rooms for maybe 6 or 7 minutes, and you guys can talk about everything that was discussed today and a little bit of like a community roundtable style. And then we'll come back, maybe share 1 or 2 highlights from the breakout sessions, and then I'll maybe give you guys a peek into our plenary speaker for this year. All righty, breaking you guys out now. Should be able to just click join. Julia, we can just keep this screen up. You can stop sharing for now, and then when we come back, you'll share that same screen, and then when it's time, we'll move it to the next screen, which has the speakers.
Hey, that's good.
Okie doke.
Me and
You can
technology.
put the PowerPoint back on, Julia. Same page.
Kimberly, are you updating the chat?
Yeah. So let me put my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm in the 45th district.
Okay.
Does anybody have anything they want to share? Any highlights from their breakout?
I think I want to share, and I think I want Kimberly to maybe say something as well. But I think a lot of times when we have meetings like this, or we talk about like legislative bills and things that impact the community, and sometimes we assume that our legislators may be informed about the issues that we're very passionate about, or the environmental climate issues. And so Kimberly was just stressing and emphasizing that we need to make sure that we're connecting with our legislators and educating them, because sometimes people have new terms and they're not familiar with like previous bills and things that may went on, or things that may be important within a certain community that they may be representing, and that we need to make sure that we're taking the time out to actually call and go and meet with them and talk through some of these things. And so I agree, because legislators sit on different committees, and sometimes they're not paying attention to everything. And so it's good for us to go and educate and inform them. So Kimberly, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so basically what I was saying to them is, in our little breakout session, is that, it's good to have those kind of relationships, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And we have the assumption, because they are legislators, that they know things, right? Or they have the same kind of passion that we do, because they sit on the certain committees. So I was just saying that, a couple of my delegates that I have a good relationship with, they was like, well, Kim, I'm on this environmental committee. I don't know nothing about the environment and this, that, and the other, right? So I'm like, so I started having to talk to her about certain things, and she was like, oh, okay. So, just developing those relationships. And then I also, from just doing a lot of lobbying, is that on a lobby day, I had a conversation with Andrea Jones's chief of staff. And I was talking to her about community solar. She had no idea what community solar was. And so, we have the assumption is that they know what we know, but they may not know, even though they have these political seats, right? And then the community solar has been around for like 10 years or more, right? And so just educating them about the environment and climate issues, and why we're so passionate, and some of the legislation that has already passed before they became, before they were appointed, or before they got into these different positions. So that's kind of like what I was talking about.
That's awesome, Kimberly. Well, thank you guys so much for the insights. I do agree. We definitely need to make our voices heard to our legislators. We will continue this conversation. Thank you to Brittany for her expertise on the Building Greater Baltimore Momentum for Equitable Climate Solutions web series in June. I'll give you guys a peek at 2 of our plenary speakers for this year. We will have the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Planning as a plenary speaker. She has a background in brownfield and LEED, and she is really excited to talk with us and talk about the question that you all have. What's Maryland's position on climate action, clean energy, sustainability, and environmental justice? And Ava Richardson, who is the director of Baltimore City's Office of Sustainability. She has been a long supporter, and we're really excited to hear from her, especially given the current landscape. So again, thank you all so much. I hope you have an amazing rest of the week, and we will see you next month. We have a July webinar, so stay tuned for that.
Thanks all.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great program
guys.
too.